Hello everyone! So today we're gonna go over some interaction cards to spice up your decks. But not just any interaction cards. These are interaction cards that can be cast for free, usually with some sort of alternative cost or condition to fulfill. And this is amazing. Being able to bypass mana costs allows you to tap out and still interact. And as a bonus, a lot of times your opponents won't see it coming. So I won't be going over the ones that are more of a staple because probably most of you already know about these. These staples include the infamous Force of Will along with the whole pitch spell cycle from Modern Horizon 1. Then there's the Evoke Incarnation cycle from Modern Horizon 2, and finally the free spell cycle from Commander 2020. And among all free spells, these are probably the ones that I'm not the biggest fan of. They have very strong effects, especially Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Sword, and their conditions are very easy to fulfill. It's simply play your commander. And yes, in turn, also these spells will protect your commander. But enough complaining, let's go over some cards. First, we'll look at some free spells from the Nemesis set. This cycle of cards are typically overcosted when you cast them using mana. However, you can cast them for free if an opponent controls a certain basic land type. So it's not really an alternate cost, but it's simply a condition to fulfill. So if the conditions are met, perfect. Casting them fairly, however, is usually not that great at all. So I would typically evaluate these cards not by looking at single games, but rather by looking at how many times I can cast this for free across multiple games. So, if you're okay with games where these turn into somewhat less ideal cards, then I'd definitely consider adding them. So first we have Massacre. Massacre is a black sorcery that costs 2 black. If an opponent controls a plains and you control a swamp, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So definitely play this if your deck heavily plays big beefy creatures. That way you can do one-sided wipe that get rid of your opponent's smaller creatures and it won't affect your creatures. And also play this if you don't play a whole lot of creatures at all in your deck. Voltron or Spellslinger decks comes to mind. Though black is probably not the most popular color among those archetypes, but they're definitely out there. And so only hitting creatures with max toughness of 2 is a little bit narrow, but more often than not, it does slow down your opponents. So this effect I find is super effective against mana dorks, utility creatures, and some general go wide token strategies. And you can think about this. How often do you see like an Elish Norn getting played and not kill a bunch of stuff? And also, since this has the potential to be free, you can play this very early ahead of the curve, really slowing your opponents if it hits mana dorks and other enablers. This will allow you to gain momentum and deploy your threat earlier than your opponents, giving you like a big tempo swing. And finally, if you gotta cast this for 4, while it's not amazing, sometimes it's actually perfectly okay, especially when someone else have like a bajillion creature tokens threatening for a win. Then next we have Submerge. Submerge is a blue instant that costs 4 and a blue. It says if an opponent controls a forest and you control an island, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Put target creature on top of its owner's library. So on the surface, this allows for tempo play, ideally against whoever is the furthest ahead or threatens a big attack against you with some big creature. Putting things back on top of library slows down opponents even more than simple bounce effect, so they'll practically lose a card draw. There's however a spicier play here. Bounce their creature in response to a tutor or a fetch land crack that they play. Boom! The targeted creature will get forced to be shuffled into the library. Pretty neat, huh? And while casting for 5 is... casting for 5 is really not exciting. I got nothing else there. But good news, however. The conditional on opponent playing green is probably the easiest to satisfy, especially in casual EDH where green is just bonkers, right? Everyone plays green. And finally, for the nemesis cycle, we have Mogg Salvage. Mogg Salvage is a red instant that costs 2 and a red. If an opponent controls an island and you control a mountain, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. Destroy target artifact. So, playing this for free is of course amazing. Playing this for 3, however, is not very exciting. It's definitely overcosted. But I cannot remember a game where there's no artifact that I want to remove, so at least it will always be relevant. There are just so many artifacts these days, and especially with the recent Brothers War set, even more. It just never stops, right? And the condition is also, well, let's see. If there's no one playing blue, well, this becomes an expensive slow spell. That might still be good news for you. So next we have some free spells from the Mercadian masques set. Instead of being conditional on opponent playing a certain color, the Mercadian mask spells provides an alternative cost to mana. So it's not entirely free, but you'll be able to play these even when you tapped out all your lands. So first we have Snuff Out. Snuff Out is a black instant that costs 3 and a black. If you control a swamp, you may pay 4 life rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Destroy target non-black creature, it cannot be regenerated. So, paying 4 life for getting rid of a creature threat is just such a good deal. Life is always one of the most available resources in Commander since we start with 40. The obvious downside here is that it doesn't hit black creatures, which can certainly bite you. However, I do think the upside of being able to play this for free definitely outweigh the rare occasion where removing a black creature saves you from losing the game. And as a little bonus, creature destroyed with this card cannot be regenerated. Regeneration, while quite the old mechanic, can at times still be relevant. Cards like Aestheticism or Swarmyard definitely sees frequent play out there in certain decks. Next we have Gush. Gush is a blue instant that costs 4 and a blue. You may return 2 islands you control to their owner's hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Draw 2 cards. So, on a glance, the alternative cost seems kinda bad. Bouncing 2 lands doesn't feel so free, right? Instead of ramping, this feels like we're de-ramping. So this cannot be good, right? Well, first, in the late game, where we might have a lot of lands but nothing to play, in that case, bouncing lands is really not that bad to get some card draw gas. But even better, what if we instead think about this as a way to reuse our land, especially in the case where you don't have a land drop? Returning lands to our hand will actually net you extra mana. So you tap a couple of islands for mana, bounce them back to your hand with Gush, then replay one of those islands to net another mana. So you'll have 3 mana total to play instead of 2. And the best part of this, if you bounce land that has special effects, like Mystic Sanctuary. You can bounce it using Gush because, guess what? Mystic Sanctuary is an island. This allows you to reuse its powerful ETB effect to recur your important instant or sorceries. Heck, you can even grab Gush again and repeat it over and over. Or if you want to be really evil, you can recur those extra turn spell over and over until you have no more friends left. Just kidding. And finally, we have the March cycle from the more recent Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set. Alright, so these are not exactly free. They still require at least a single color pip to cast, but they do have an X cost that you can pay by exiling cards of the respective color instead. So each card you exile counts as 2 to fulfill that X cost. So pitching 1 card makes X equals 2. 2 cards, X equals 4, and so on. And because you'll be pitching cards as a cost, these cards works best if with decks that can keep a full grip of hand most of the time. If your deck does struggle with card draw, then you probably don't want to play any of these. So first we have March of Otherworldly Light. March of Otherworldly Light is a white instant that costs a white and X. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile any number of white cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. So, this is an extremely versatile removal. First thing to notice is that it hits artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So probably most important targets that we care about. It doesn't hit planeswalkers, but who cares about planeswalkers? Second, the really nice thing about this is that it exiles. Since almost every single deck in EDH cares about the graveyard or recur things in one way or another, exile effects are just absolutely great. The downside of this card is that it is not super efficient for removing high CMC stuff. Without pitching cards from hand, I'd probably go as far as spending 3 mana for the X. So with a total mana cost of 4 to remove something that's really, really important. But otherwise, I'd be pitching at most 2 other white cards to make X equals 4 if I really need to, which can hit a lot of powerful permanents. Remember that you can also mix and match. For example, you can pay 2 mana and pitch a card for X equals 3. Next, we have March of Swirling Mist. March of Swirling Mist is a blue instant that costs blue and X. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may exile any number of blue cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Up to X target creatures phase out. So, this one is also very versatile, though in a different way. This card can be used both as offensive and for defensive purposes. For offense, it can temporarily get rid of blockers if you need to get some damage through. It can also turn off some engine pieces temporarily, preventing your opponents from accumulating value. And then it can also turn off stack pieces, allowing you to sneak in whatever you need to play, maybe even take care of the stack pieces permanently. And then on defense, the most obvious thing is to perhaps protect your best creatures from a board wipe. And being a phase-out effect, this is probably actually the most effective way to protect your creatures. It will protect your stuff from probably 99% of all types of board wipe effects. It will dodge destroy effects, minus toughness effects, sacrifice, and even bounce effects like Cyclonic Rift. That's why Tavari's protection is such a staple, right? Because of the phase-out effect. And I'd say you don't always need to pitch cards to use this, but it's just such a valuable tool to be able to cast using cards in your hand. You only need to leave up a single blue mana, and when you really need to protect your stuff, then you can just use it. And finally, we have March of the Reckless Joy. March of Reckless Joy is a red instant that costs red and X. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may exile any number of red cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Exile the top X cards of your library. You may play up to 2 of those cards until the end of your next turn. So, this is the least exciting of the 3 cards from the March cycles. And it's not really an interaction, but it definitely still has its place in decks. So, March of Reckless Joy allows you to impulse draw. And it's the good kind of impulse draw. The one that lets you play the exile cards on your next turn, not just this turn. However, the big limitation here is that you are only allowed to play 2 cards out of all the exiled cards. So, let's see some similar cards to March of Reckless Joy. First, we have Light Up the Stage. So you probably almost always play this for the discounted spectacle cost, which it will cost 1 to see 2 cards, right? And then there's the big version, Commune with Lava, which allows you to see X cards. So I would say Reckless Joy is somewhat a blend or a midpoint between these two due to its flexibility. So let's see this, let's analyze this a little bit case by case. For small X value like X equals 2, Light Up the Stage is obviously better since it will only cost you 1 mana. March of Reckless Joy will cost you 3 to do that. Though, note, you can do this at instant speed. Commune with Lava, on the other hand, is the worst for small X values like this, due to the base 2 red pip cost. So in order to see 2 cards, you'll have to pay 4. Now how about the times where X is big and you have plenty of mana to utilize? So with Commune with Lava, you'll have the slight upper hand since you can play any number of the exiled cards. Unlike March of Reckless Joy, which has a hard limit of 2. That said, I think you typically don't often want to cast more than 2 cards except for in certain types of decks. Then finally, of course, comes the main advantage of March of Reckless Joy compared to both the other cards. And that's that you can exile red cards from your hand to pay for each 2 with an X. So for each card you pitch, you'll be able to see 2 cards from your deck, which I think is a great rate, especially if you have a lot of useless cards in hands and need to dig into your deck for answers. So for every 1 card that you exile, you'll be able to see 2 cards. So there you have it, some free spells to hopefully spice up your decks. What do you think about free spells, and do you already use them in your decks? Let me know in the comments. I'm really excited to hear what you think about those. And if this video is in any way helpful to you, please consider liking and subscribing. That will really help the channel grow. And with that, I wish you a wonderful day and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye bye.